Welcome back to the Crypto Watch channel, everyone. My name is Josh, and in just a moment, I'm going to be sharing my next Bitcoin price prediction that aligns very well with this Bitcoin chart, which tells us the Bitcoin price should bottom out by the end of next month. Definitely watch this entire video all the way to the end so you don't miss out on any of this important information. Just starting off on the 4-hour Bitcoin chart, and this descending triangle pattern is obviously still in its formation phase. Just yesterday, we saw a perfect bounce from this level of support sitting at around 28,500. And if we see a confirmed break below 28,500, then we do have a technical price target down towards around 25 to 26,000, basically revisiting those lows that we set around 2.5 weeks ago. But once again, we need to see a confirmed break below 28,500 in order for that price target to come into play. And at the time of recording this video, we have not seen that, at least just yet. And we also need to keep an eye on this level of resistance coming into play at around $30,000 per Bitcoin. And we do have another level of resistance right around here coming in at around 30.7k as well. And if you zoom out to the daily Bitcoin chart, as I mentioned in yesterday's Bitcoin update video, the daily Bitcoin RSI has broken below this upward trending line of support, which usually means this bullish divergence has now been invalidated. But with that being said, we're still currently in higher lows on the RSI. So technically speaking, we can still be forming another bullish divergence here because we're still seeing lower lows in the price action once again and higher lows in the RSI. And if you look at the last time where we saw a significant crash in the Bitcoin price, a large week to the downside, and then a lot of choppy sideways price action while we saw a failed bullish divergence, basically with the daily RSI broke below an upward trending line of support. We saw a very similar thing during the middle of last year, right after that May crash, which was a significant crash in the Bitcoin price. And then after that crash, we saw a massive wick to the downside, a lot of choppy sideways price action. And then the price of Bitcoin on the daily chart formed a huge bullish divergence between the RSI, but then we saw a break to the downside in the daily RSI, which could have technically invalidated this daily bullish divergence. But as I also mentioned yesterday, if you compare this area of price action to what we're seeing at the moment on the 2-day Bitcoin chart, we are still seeing an active bullish divergence right now and an active bullish divergence throughout that entire time period, that entire consolidation range in the middle of last year. But the similarities between these two areas on the chart go deeper than that. For example, if you're looking at the weekly Bitcoin charts, when we saw that crash down towards 25,000 in the price of Bitcoin, we saw a massive spike in volume showing a big capitulation. And if you're looking throughout many years worth of Bitcoin's history, usually when we see a massive crash in the price of Bitcoin combined with a massive spike in volume, that tends to be either the bottom for the Bitcoin price or very close to the bottom, like what we saw in the middle of last year. We obviously had that massive crash during May last year, but then at the end of that crash during May, we saw this huge spike in volume representing a lot of Bitcoin changing hands at that time. But then over the next 1 to 2 months, we saw a lot of consolidation in the Bitcoin price. Basically, we didn't really go that much lower than the initial low, only around $1,000 to $2,000 lower. And after a couple months of consolidation, basically a couple months of accumulation happening, we then saw a significant bullish reversal in the price of Bitcoin. So if you simply copy this previous price action and overlay it on top of what we're seeing right now to see how they compare, that looks like this on the daily Bitcoin chart. Once again, this is the price action that we saw in the middle of last year overlaid on top of the current Bitcoin price action. And so far, we can even see a lot of similarities in the Bitcoin price this time round to what we saw last time. And so according to this fractal and according to multiple signals that I just discussed, we could be due for a bit more consolidation and potentially revisit those lows that we set a couple weeks ago. But based on this fractal and based on all of those other signals that I just talked about, once again, this means the Bitcoin price has either already found its bottom or it's very close to bottoming out. Because like I said, during the middle of last year, we did actually go a little bit lower than the original low, maybe a few $1,000s in the Bitcoin price, because during May, we bottomed out at around 30,000, but during around June, we went down towards around 28 to 29,000 as the actual bottom. And if you're heading back to the weekly Bitcoin chart, looking at these spikes in volume once again, obviously we saw a massive spike in volume during that March 2020 crash, but we saw an immediate reversal because we saw a massive Fed U-turn, basically dropping interest rates, started to print money, all of that sort of stuff, and that right now is very unlikely to happen. And so if you're looking at the other time where we saw a massive spike in volume here within the last 5 years or so during a Bitcoin crash, that was basically at the end of the 2018 bear market. But when we saw that spike in volume, that wasn't the bottom for the Bitcoin price, but it was very close to the bottom. If you're looking at the exact weekly candle where we saw that spike in volume come into play, we actually bottomed out at that stage at around 3.4k, but the bottom for the actual actual bear market back in 2018 was at around 3.1k. So we still went a little bit lower, but not that much lower. And then what we saw was around 3 months approximately worth of sideways price action, relatively speaking, just a consolidation / accumulation range. Before then, we saw a massive reversal in the price of Bitcoin after a couple months worth of sideways consolidation, similar to what we saw in the middle of last year once again. So as of right now, based on multiple different signals, indicators, and these previous examples that we've seen over years worth of Bitcoin's history, the most likely scenario for Bitcoin moving forward is to perhaps have 1 to 2 months worth of sideways consolidation, relatively speaking, just basically an accumulation range similar to what we saw in the middle of last year or what we saw at the end of 2018, early 2019. But remember, during those time periods right there, we did see a sweep of the lows back in the middle of last year. In fact, we put in a slightly lower low, and back at the end of the 2018 bear markets, we ended up putting in one more lower low after that spike in volume, which was around 10% lower than the initial low that we formed. And so if you measure out 10% below the initial 25k low that we already formed, that will put us at around 23,000 approximately, basically 22 to 23,000, which is right where the 200-week moving average is coming into play. And when you're talking about significant bottoms in the Bitcoin price, looking at the 2014 bear market, the 2018 bear market, the March 2020 crash, all of these macro Bitcoin bottoms have occurred at around the 200-week moving average. But to be a little bit more flexible, the best buying opportunities throughout Bitcoin's history have occurred in between the 1,000-day simple moving average, which is the green line, and the 200-week MA, which is the red line once again. And as I just said, the 200-week moving average is coming in at around 22 to 23,000, and the 1,000-day moving average is coming in at around 28 to 28,500. And something else that we also have to keep in mind is the weekly Bitcoin RSI, because it is very close to oversold territories, and we have only ever seen the weekly Bitcoin RSI enter into oversold territories just 2 other times in Bitcoin's entire price history. But we don't necessarily have to see the weekly Bitcoin RSI enter into oversold territories in order to confirm a bottom. For example, what we saw in March 2020, even though the Bitcoin price bottomed out then, we did not see the weekly Bitcoin RSI enter into oversold territories. It's just if we do, then that would provide an even better opportunity. And now zooming all the way out to the monthly Bitcoin chart and looking at the monthly Bitcoin MACD, simply based on the 2 previous significant Bitcoin bear markets, which were 2014 and 2018, Bitcoin is statistically most likely to find some sort of bottom sometime next month during June, obviously. And if you zoom into the MACD, so you can actually see what happened in earlier Bitcoin years back in 2014 and 2015. We saw the first ever bearish cross in the monthly Bitcoin MACD during the 2014 bear market, and exactly 5 months after we saw that bearish cross in the monthly Bitcoin MACD, we saw the bottom for the bear market in 2014 entering into early 2015. And just zooming out a little bit further in the MACD, so you can see what happened during the 2018 bear market, we saw a bearish cross in the monthly Bitcoin MACD roughly halfway through the bear market, similar to what we saw in the 2014 bear market. And then if you measure from that point right there to the bottom of the 2018 bear market, that was exactly 5 months after we saw a bearish cross in the monthly Bitcoin MACD. And the most recent bearish cross in the monthly Bitcoin MACD was roughly around 4 months ago, because if you measure 5 months out from that bearish cross, that places us in June, so next month, which aligns pretty closely to what I was talking about back here on the weekly Bitcoin charts, how we could be in for a similar situation like what we saw in the middle of last year, or like what we saw at the end of the 2018 bear market. Basically some sort of accumulation range forming, and perhaps a slightly lower low, but not that much lower than the initial low based on these previous examples. And if you're using the 2021 example, that could put us in a bit more of a bullish reversal sometime during July or August, as one of the most likely scenarios for Bitcoin moving forward based on years worth of Bitcoin's history and multiple patterns, indicators, and signals. But it is really important to mention that a lot of this also depends on what the stock market is doing. For example, if the stock market keeps dumping into new lower lows, then the most likely scenario could change to something else. But while the stock market is holding up relatively okay, so basically if the stock market doesn't really make any new lower lows, then as of right now, this is one of the most likely scenarios that I can see based on all of that information that I just shared. And of course, I'll be sure to keep you updated if anything changes, like for example, if we see a further reversal in the stock markets, I'll be sure to cover that here on the channel and also on my Twitter in real time. And make sure to check out one of these videos popping up right here on your screen if you want to know how to keep making money in crypto, even if prices are going up, down, or sideways. But that is it for this update. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in the next video.